What's good? It's your boy Fanon. Okay, so the numbers in for Jacob Selecki, and I think it did pretty decent. I think it did decent numbers. I don't think that it was a flop. I don't think it was like a major knockout the park success on HBO, but it did slightly better than I expected. I think this really helped out by having two American fighters on the fight on the card in Daniel Jacobs and Jarrell Miller. So there might have been a little bit more regional interest in New York City, which has a big population. So I think that it was okay, man. But at the same time, it still shows that HBO Boxing continues this trend where HBO Boxing, when I say it's doing decent, I think it did pretty decent, or it did decent. That's looking at HBO's numbers. It still did fewer viewers for Jacob Selecki than Showtime did for the Adrian Bronner fight, which, I mean, I'm telling you, a few years ago, that just wasn't happening, man, unless you had like Mike Tyson fighting on Showtime or something, and his were pay-per-views. But it just really does show you the state of HBO Boxing and how HBO Boxing is falling off when they're consistently doing fewer numbers, worse numbers than fights that are televised on HBO. So let me get into the numbers. The viewer, it peaked at 847,000, averaged 811,000 on HBO. But before I do that, I'm going to cover this in the subject of the Gennady Golovkin fight that I did a video on earlier today in the live stream. So I hope that you would attend the live stream that's going to happen later today. And the best way to know about that is to hit the bell icon, to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you can be notified of when it happens. I don't necessarily schedule it out for any particular time. So the best way to know about it and speak with very knowledgeable and mature boxing fans is to hit that subscribe button in the bell icon and select to get all notifications. Also, thank you for everybody. Again, I got to say this every time. Thank you guys for supporting, the cause that we raise money for in the super chats. And in the in Venmo, you guys, I really do appreciate it, and the kids appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I hope you accept my invite to attend the live stream. So let me go through this article. Keith Idec came out with the numbers. Danny Jacobs' unremarkable performance in his previous appearance didn't deter boxing fans from tuning in to his fight against Selecki on Saturday night. Ratings revealed Tuesday by Nielsen Media Research indicated Jacob Selecki drew a peak audience of 874,000 for HBO. Their entertaining 12-round middleweight match maintained an average of 811 viewers. That's a notable increase in ratings from Jacob's last HBO bout. That fight, a 12-round unanimous decision defeat of Luis Arias, attracted a peak audience of 765,000 and an average audience of 706,000 on November 11th. Jacobs Arias was monotonous compared to Jacob Selecki, largely because Arias fought cautiously and didn't engage against the hard-hitting Jacobs in Uniondale, New York. Poland Selecki showed no such reluctance in their WBC elimination match on Brooklyn's Jacobs and seemed intent on entertaining more than he did against Arias. Also, the opener of HBO's World Championship Boxing doubleheader Saturday night, Jarrell Miller, Duopos, drew an average of 834,000. A peak of 834,000, an average 706,000. And, those are pretty much the numbers there. And like I said, I think they're decent. But that, again, that's a good bit smaller than the peak of 891,000 that Jesse Vargas versus Adrian Bronner did the week before in Showtime in the same place, Barclays Center, right? In the weekend before with Adrian Bronner. And see, here's the thing, and I do this a lot of times for people, just so when you look at the numbers, and sometimes people will say, well, that's the same, that's roughly the same numbers, 800 and 91,000 versus 874,000. But that's not quite true because HBO is 30% bigger than Showtime. So what I always do is when I want to compare the numbers, and you can, like people say numbers lie, women lie, men lie, but numbers don't lie. Well, your analysis of the numbers can, it just, what do you think is a fair measure when you're analyzing the numbers? So the way that I do it is I know that Showtime is 30% smaller than HBO. And it's a subscription network. So the only people typically that are going to be able to watch it, and tune in are people that have subscriptions. So the way that I do it, and if I'll take the Showtime number, and I'll multiply that times 1.3. So 891,000 times 0.13 is 1.58 million. So per viewer, right? If you equalize it for that, then that's significantly better performance for Adrian Bronner. But the reason I'm saying that this again just shows where HBO is that you don't even, when you can just be outperformed on Showtime, right? And then HBO, that just tells you that, there's just no way that there shouldn't be a situation where on a regular basis, Showtime is just in raw numbers outperforming HBO, right? So then the funny thing, of course, to me is that you have, Eddie Hearn, right, who's the promoter. And I wouldn't put this on Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn's not responsible for HBO viewership, right? HBO to get fighters to watch HBO fights, HBO has to do their job. Whoever the people that showed up to the Barclays Center, and the fact that the Barclays Center was half empty, that's on Eddie Hearn. The fact that fewer people watched on Showtime on HBO than Showtime, that's on HBO. But when you look at Deontay Wilder's number, and Deontay Wilder did, I think, 1.2, right? And if you do 1.2 times 1.3 to take into consideration that extra 30%, right? You get 1.56 million on HBO, right? And I'm telling you, man, that's not quite double. That's not quite double the numbers for Deontay Wilder's fight against Luis Ortiz, right? And that's just telling you that boxing on HBO is falling apart, man. I don't think that this is not some trend or some situation where, it's on Daniel Jacobs or it's on Jarrell Miller. I don't think that's the case, because actually, if you look at what has been happening in with the numbers as far as HBO's been going from 2016 to 2017, right? The numbers have just gone down for HBO across the board. There's an article that's in the Fightful.com where they lay out, shout out to the Fightful.com, where they lay out the average viewership for fights for main events in 2016 and 2017, right? In 2016, and this was pretty much, this is on Peter Nelson. And maybe it was, the direction that their budgeting goes or whatever, how they marketing fights, whatever the case. But in 2016, the average viewership for the main events for HBO was 856,000 for the 13 events that took place in 2016. And that was Kovalev, Pascal, Crawford, Lundy, Ortiz, Thompson, Ward, Barrera, Golovkin, Wade, Vargas, Salido, Kovalev, Shalimbe, Ward, Brand, Golovkin, Brook, Ortiz, Scott, Lomachenko, Walters, Crawford, Molina, and Hopkins versus Smith Jr., right? When Hopkins got knocked out in the ring. Now, over 13 events, it averaged 856,000. In 2017, it dropped by almost 100. The average dropped by almost 150 over 150,000 average for the main event. Because they went to fights like Vargas Berchelt. Like now you start seeing these smaller weight classes come in, right? And that's Peter Nelson starting to focus on that. But even where you have some of the larger ones, you have the numbers for, so you have Vargas Berchelt at 497,000, Lemieux Stevens 600,000, Lomachenko Sosa 832,000, and Kovalev Shabransky. Kovalev's actually numbers are, 690, but fights like Bivol, Broadhurst, and, Linares Campbell, Corrales Machado, Cotto Kamaji did pretty decently, and Cotto Ali did pretty decently. But it's just that, man, just the whole thing seems to be dropping off. So if you look at, and now this year, for example, I believe that's even lower this year than it was in 2017, because you have fights like Roy Vasai, right? Superfly 2, 753,000. Lucas Matisse, 719,000. It's just, well, they have a, Boxing After Dark replay was 490,000. It's just that HBO is not doing very well. So that's why I say that if you look at the numbers that Danny Jacobs did, that's actually, I think it might even be a case of the exception proving the rule. Here you have two American fighters in larger weight classes, the heavyweight division and the middleweight division, that bring up the numbers, right? They're 700 and 874,000 is almost 200 higher, is almost 200,000 higher, almost, not quite, than the average for 2017. And I'm trying to see how many times did you do better than that in 2017? You had one time Cotto. Yeah, Cotto did better. Crawford Diaz did better. Cotto, Saddam Ali, Crawford, and Diaz are the only times that they did better. I would also say that probably since Joshua Klitschko did 738,000, that was a replay. But all in all, man, Danny Jacobs, I think that they have to be pretty happy. I think they have to be decently happy with those numbers. That's not bad for HBO. But at the same time, if you would have said, okay, well, how do these numbers compare? How do these numbers compare against 2014, right? Look at all the times that regular fights in 2014 and 2015 did over 1 million. Chavez versus Vera, 1.3 million. Kovalev Agnew, 1 million. Marquez Alvarado, 1.1 million. Provodnikov Algieri, 1 million. Crawford Gamboa, 1.2 million. Golovkin Rubio, 1.3 million. Hopkins Kovalev, 1.3 million. How many times was it over 900,000? Pascal Brute. Golovkin Gil. Rios, Brandon Rios did 900,000. Klitschko Pulev kind of flopped up, but I think that was in the middle of the afternoon. Lemieux Rosado did 900,000. There's only 2 times. One, two, 3 times in all of 2014 where a main event did less than, and this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 16 cards in 2014. Then 2015, I think their numbers even went up. But then one of them you have Alvarez Kirkland, right? But you have you have Alvarez, Mike Alvarado. This is 2015. Mike Alvarado fought Brandon Rios and did 1.2 million on HBO. Kovalev Pascal, 1.1. Matisse versus Provodnikov, 1.2. Klitschko versus Jennings, 1.6. Alvarez Kirkland, 2 million. Golovkin Monroe, 1.3. Cotto Gill, 1.5. Tim Bradley versus Jesse Vargas, 1.1. Kovalev Mohammadi, 1 million. Crawford Jean, Derry Jean, 1 million. Klitschko versus Tyson Fury, 1 million. Now that was on a replay. And actually Klitschko, and I do believe that was on a replay, which actually Klitschko versus Fury, wow, I think that outperformed Joshua. Man, I didn't realize that before. It did. Wow, Klitschko, who would have thunk it? That Joshua Klitschko was outperformed by Tyson Fury versus Klitschko. Huh. Ain't that interesting when we start talking about the numbers and the drawing power of some of these fighters. But yeah, man, that's, like I said, man, it's just been a drop year after year after year. From 14 on HBO, 2014's numbers was actually kind of looked like it was a little bit of a bump from 2014 to 2015. But when I'm looking at when I'm talking about these numbers for Showtime, right, that's why I'm telling you, when you do that multiplier 1.3, it shows itself. Because now you have, because I'm not saying that when you say that Adrian Bronner on is the equivalent of a 1.2 million or something like that, or 1.2 million on HBO, that's a reasonable thing, because just a couple years ago, you had Mike Alvarado and Brandon Rios doing 1.2 million on HBO, and Matisse Provodnikov doing 1.2 on HBO. What is it about HBO that is making their viewership numbers drop like that? I mean, is it the quality of the fights? I mean, these are Mike Alvarado versus Brandon Rios isn't something where that's just a hell of a fight, you know? Or Klitschko Jennings. That's not some fight where it's like, yeah, man, I can't wait to see Klitschko Jennings. I could see Canelo Alvarez versus Kirkland. That was going to be something that was pretty exciting. But it has to come down to HBO. It has to come down to HBO and boxing and HBO's coverage of boxing. And I think also the fact that the quality of the fights on Showtime have gone up so high. So now you're seeing fights that are just on a regular basis, high quality fights. You have on one card, like that fight card with the 150, basically, which was a 154-pound tournament last year with Lara, Goshaw, Jermell Charlo versus Lubin, Hurd versus Trout. I mean, for avid boxing fans, that is a heck of a card, man. A heck of a card. That's a much better card than what they're getting over there on HBO. So I'm just feeling like it's got to be not just, it's not just the quality of the fight. It's not just the quality of the fights on HBO. It's the increase in the quality on Showtime. The fact that Showtime Boxing has really focused very heavily on developing it and marketing towards the crowds of people that actually want to watch the fights. Where you have the two most active demographics in America in boxing are Spanish-speaking community and the black community in the United States. But the biggest, the largest potential audience is in the European American and the European community. But they're not there's not the percentage of them that are going to be reliably watch boxing is smaller. Where you have 50% of Spanish-speaking, the Hispanic community, quote unquote, that is interested in boxing. Half of the sports fans consider themselves to be boxing fans. And half of that consider themselves to be avid fans. And the number bears itself out in the black community as well. But HBO Showtime focusing on those communities and making sure that their high quality fighters are getting a larger amount of avid fans to watch their channel. Where Showtime where HBO is trying to focus on the European fighter and trying to capture that larger market of fight fans, but a larger market that has a smaller percentage of it that are actually going to be willing to watch boxing or interested in the sport of boxing at all. You know what I mean? So it's like Showtime, it's like HBO is, looking for a bird in the bush, right? And Showtime is taking the bird in the hand. And like they say, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. So I think that that's what's showing this constant trend of HBO's numbers going down and Showtime's numbers coming up. And also, HBO, their commentary sucks. I mean, just for real. Trying to sell fighters and argue and tearing down fighters. Over time, man, when you make yourself like Jim Lampley does and Larry Merchant did, when you make yourself the center of the attraction and think that people care more about what you have to say than what the fighters are doing in the ring, I think this is what you get. And that's just a failed business model. And then you get hit with something like the Game of Thrones and Westworld, these big movie productions, basically movie productions that are getting sold as as a weekly program. These gigantic budgets. Then you got less money to market on the channel, so it just goes to pot. And I don't mind seeing it, man, because at a certain point in time, I just want to see that HBO just completely reboot its boxing program, with the exception of Roy Jones Jr. and Andre Ward. And maybe if Max Kellerman, keeps a little more real, Max Kellerman can stick around. But the rest of that thing has got to go. And it's showing itself in the numbers. But, this was, again, it was a better showing this time than it had been in the last few weeks. So I think Daniel Jacobs and Jarrell Miller kind of held their own on this particular weekend. But we'll see what happens in the next one. But HBO's got to step their game up if they want to continue to compete with Showtime, because right now, Showtime's absolutely demolishing them, and it's something we've been predicting was going to happen for a while, and now it's just fully in fruition. And with that, I'm out. Peace.